Well, welcome to another Friday night. We've been taking a deeper look at the 60 characteristics of complex trauma. And today we come to, they don't know who they are. People from complex trauma, one of the things I hear them say to me very often is, I don't know who I am. So I want to look at why that is, and then begin to look at some helpful, very practical tools in learning who we are. So to begin, why don't people from complex trauma know who they are? And I want to give you 4 reasons why that is so. So if you think of a child coming into the world, they have all of these competing needs and drives inside of them. So one of the needs is, or drives is to be authentic, to be who they are. But they also have a need to be loved, to be accepted, to connect with other people. And so a child coming into the world, if it's in a healthy home, they're able to be authentic and they wait, will I be accepted? Will I be loved? And yes, they are accepted. Yes, they are loved. Yes, they connect. And so in their mind, being authentic is a good thing, and I can just be me and I can be loved and connected for who I am. But bring that in complex trauma. The child comes into an unhealthy situation and they decide to be authentic, but that doesn't work so well for them. No one wants to connect with them. They're punished or laughed at or teased or criticized for parts of who they are when they're authentic. And so what they quickly realize is, if I want to be loved, if I want to connect with people, I have to hide who I am. I can't be authentic. And so I have to learn how to wear masks. I have to learn how to sense what other people want from me and become what they want, be a chameleon. I have to adopt different roles in situations so that people will like me, respect me, and want to be my friend. And so very early on, they have this core belief that develops, I can't be who I am, I have to be somebody else. So that leads to not knowing who they really are, because the earlier in life you had to wear masks and not be authentic and adopt roles, the greater chance that you don't know who you are, because you've always worn masks, always played roles. So that's the first reason. The second characteristic of children coming into life is just a natural curiosity. So they come into life and they explore, they try new things, sports, hobbies, painting, music, and they spend time just dreaming about stuff in a fantasy world of what they would like to be one day. And if you're in a safe world, you can do that. And when you're in safety, your cortex works at its maximum, and it allows you to be curious and to explore. And all of that leads to a child figuring out what they're good at, figuring out who they are, figuring out their personality. But bring in complex trauma. When you're in survival mode, the cortex isn't working very well, and you can't be concerned about being curious about life and exploring. You're all about, what do I have to do to survive? You're in fight, flight. You're not in curiosity mode. And so you can't figure out who you are. You're just trying to survive. And then beyond that, part of what makes life unsafe for some children is that they grow up in families of abuse where they are just made servants or slaves by their parents. And it's just work, work, work. They don't have time to go out and play sports or do things with friends and other hobbies. And so it's just they're working, serving, and they don't get a chance to figure out who they are. Or some have a father who's a dictator, and he tells them how to think, how to feel. He tells them what jobs they should take. He allows only certain activities and forbids other types of hobbies. He might even tell them what university courses and career they should pursue. He regulates and controls their life. They don't have a chance to figure out who they are. And then some parents, They want their child to fulfill their dream for the child. They want their child to be a doctor or an NHL player. They don't let the child explore what they're good at, what their personality is. The child is forced to carry out the parents' dreams for them. And they don't get a chance to figure out who they are or what they want to do with their life. And then another aspect of a child living in an environment where they're safe is they get to connect with themselves. They get to explore their internal world, not just the external world. And so they can think about their emotional world. They can explore their thoughts and what they feel about different things. They can dream, they can plan, and they can get to know their impulses and their emotions and their thought world, all their internal world. They can explore that. And then they can explore, what is it I want to do with my life? What's my purpose? What do I have a passion for? All of that happens in a safe environment, in a healthy family. But what happens in complex trauma? You're surviving. You don't want to explore your internal world because your internal world is made up of painful emotions that you can't resolve. You, therefore, need to disconnect from your internal world. And so you disconnect from your emotions. You disconnect from a lot of your thinking. You disconnect from your passions and sense of purpose. You're just trying to survive and not feel. And so you don't connect to your external world or to your internal world. You don't have time to explore dreams, all of that stuff. There's one other aspect of what happens to a child in a healthy world when they're authentic versus a child in complex trauma. In a healthy world, if you're allowed to be authentic and your parents provide a loving environment, safe environment, if your parents are living fairly healthy life and role modeling healthy behaviors, you're in a world where you're learning about hard work and honesty and reliability and respect. But what happens if you're a child in complex trauma where it's very unsafe and you don't have good role models? Well, you have to lie to survive. You can't be always reliable because some days you're running. You have an anger problem because you fight back. You avoid, you shut down. You develop ways of coping that let you survive, but they aren't healthy. And so what happens is you're actually building kind of a dark side, a part of you that is very dishonest, very unreliable, very disrespectful. That dark side is where you have to live in order to survive. And so what I find with some clients is when they get into recovery, into a safe environment, and they start looking at themselves, they go, I don't know who I am, but I'm afraid I'm my dark side, that's the real me. And sadly, for many, that is a very discouraging thought that causes them to feel, I'm too messed up. But because their dark side had to be so big in order to survive, they really don't know who the real little them is underneath that dark side. So what I want to do tonight is just look at, are there practical tools that can help us find out who we are? And so let's begin with what makes us who we are. How do you define in general categories what makes a human a human? So let me give you 3 areas that are important in my mind that define who we are. So number 1, we have a personality. And what I mean by a personality is our basic wiring that governs how I interact with the world, how I think, my learning style, how I process information, how I feel loved, how I want to give love. It is basically my unique wiring that makes me different from everybody. It comes in, it is born into me, I'm hardwired with it, and so it'll make me outgoing, shy. It'll make me a leader, a follower, very detail-oriented, etc. That's my basic personality. Everybody has one. Everybody's is a little bit different. The second thing is we all come into the world with certain things that we're just naturally good at, skills, talents, abilities. So some are just naturally just gifted in sports. Others are very klutzy in sports. Others are great with math. Others are terrible with math. Some love abstract stuff. Some need very concrete stuff. Some are very artistic. Some love music. Some love organizing. Some are great in drama theater and acting. Some love to cook. Some are great at teaching. All of those skills are part of who we are. And again, we're born with those, but they have to develop as we try different things, as we learn about those things. And then the third part of what makes us who we are is our deepest passions. What is our purpose for life? What excites us? And so some people get really excited about certain topics, history, philosophy, and they just want to explore that. Others have a passion for helping people, or for helping animals, or for helping underprivileged people. Built into all of us, there's a certain passion that defines what we feel is our purpose for being alive. So those three things just are helpful categories in understanding what makes us human. So what I want to do now is give you a basic personality test. Let me say a couple things about that. There's lots of different personality tests available today. I went on the internet, and there's a number of personality tests that you can do on the internet for free. There's Myers-Briggs, which is one of the most popular ones, been around a long time. Personality tests help us figure out what our personality is. But what I have found in giving personality tests to people in recovery from trauma and addiction is that the question becomes, is this personality test helping them see their true personality, or is it just identifying the masks and roles that they've adopted? Because when a lot of people do a personality test and it asks them a question, they don't think of it in terms of the real them because they don't know the real them. They answer it based on the masks they've worn and the roles they've adopted, and kind of what they were made to feel they were good at by others, which could have been they were pressured into certain kinds of behavior and validated for it. And so personality tests for people from complex trauma can be very helpful, but they can also not be as defined and clear as we would hope them to be. And one of the things I've done with clients is have them take a personality test and then a year later take it again. And many find that their answers changed a lot because over that past year they dropped a lot of masks. They began to understand who they really were. And so I'm going to go through parts of a personality test today just to give you a flavor. But again, I want you to be mindful of the fact that your answer today might change if you're still early in recovery and you're still not sure who the real you is, whether it's the same as your masks or different from your masks. So let me give you a bunch of questions. So the first one, are you usually, option A good mixer, or rather quiet and reserved? So you can mark A or B. 2, when you are with a group of people, would you usually rather join in the talk of the group or talk with one person at a time? 3, do you usually prefer to hang around with others or be on your own? 4, after a long, exhausting week, option A social event is what you need. B, An evening by yourself is what you need. 5, do you tend to have broad friendships with different people or deep friendships with a very few people? 6, you're waiting in a long line. Would you chat to someone in line or play on your phone or look at the floor? 7, you are looking for an apartment. Would you have a roommate or would you prefer to live alone? So, out of those 7, answer A is what would be called an extrovert. So if you answered all A, you would be classified as an extrovert. If you answered B, you would be classified as an introvert. Now, many people have a concept around being an introvert or an extrovert that is basically defined as an introvert is shy, an extrovert is outgoing. And there's an element of truth to that, but that misses really the key distinction between an introvert and an extrovert. An introvert, in order to recharge their batteries, needs time alone, healthy self-care alone. An extrovert, in order to recharge their batteries, needs to be with people. Another way to say that is for an introvert, being with people drains them a lot. Being alone recharges them. Extroverts, being alone can actually be draining for them. Being with people recharges them. Now, having said that, I want you to understand something up front. Recharging batteries, our own batteries, requires connection. We need connection to ourself. We need connection usually to a higher power and to one person. So an introvert just needs one person. An extrovert needs lots of people that they can connect with. So think of the challenges in recovery. Introverts need time alone in order to recharge their batteries, but the danger for them is they cross a line, so they go from withdrawing in order to recharge to isolating. And isolating is actually a very draining thing. It doesn't recharge them at all. It leads to mental health problems, depression, etc. And so, introverts need to connect with people and figure out the difference between healthy withdrawal and isolation. And that is a challenge, and many introverts are shy. And so in order to connect with people and build a new support network that's healthy, they have to fight through shyness. In other words, they got to fight through a lot of fear about connecting, about being authentic with people when they are quite reserved, quite shy. An extrovert, they need to be with lots of people, but their danger is that's all they want to do. They never want to be alone. They never want to connect with self. They just want to connect with people. And so for an extrovert in recovery, they need to learn the value of time alone connecting with self. And they need to do it in small doses, but they do need to learn to do it. Now let me add one other piece here. Many children from complex trauma who were introverts hated that they were introverts. And they looked at extroverts and they said, they're the ones that have all the friends. They seem so happy all the time. I wish I was an extrovert. And they saw extroversion as a strength and introversion as a weakness. But what I want you to understand is introverts are just as important as extroverts. One is not better than the other. They're just different. And an introvert brings strengths that an extrovert doesn't have. And an extrovert brings strengths that an introvert doesn't have. And so for an introvert, if you were one who hated being an introvert and saw it as a weakness, I just hope you can kind of accept it and see the strengths you bring that come out of your introversion that an extrovert does not have. Okay, let me go on to a couple more questions. So, number 8, when you go somewhere for the day, would you rather A, plan what you will do and when, or B, just go and see what happens. Number 9, do you prefer to arrange parties, dates, vacations well in advance, or be free to do whatever looks like fun when the time comes? Number 10, when it is settled well in advance that you will do a certain thing at a certain time, so if somebody gives you a schedule, do you find it nice to be able to plan accordingly, or a little unpleasant to be tied down so much? 11, does following a schedule appeal to you or cramp you? 12, is your desk super organized or a jumble of everything you're working on? 13, does the idea of making a list of what you should get done over the weekend A, appeal to you, or B, leave you cold, or C, positively depress you? 14, do you often have a backup plan for your backup plan? A, yes, B, no. So that's just identifying two other types of personality components, which is A, being very organized, B, being spontaneous, more spontaneous. Now, this is where it can get tricky with people from complex trauma, because you realize that a complex trauma person can be hyper-organized because they're a control freak. That's not necessarily who they are. That's what they had to do to survive. Or a person from complex trauma can be so used to chaos and living in chaos that that's what they still do today, and they do everything at the last moment, spontaneously. They don't plan because you can't plan when you're in chaos. And so that is not necessarily who they are. That's just what came out of living in danger, complex trauma, chaos. And so what I want you to understand again is often organized people, they look down on spontaneous type people. They see them as lazy, as immature, as irresponsible. But yet spontaneous people often look down on organized people. They see them as boring, as never having fun, as rigid. But again, one's not better than the other. One's not good, one's not bad. They're just different. We need organized people. We need spontaneous people. They both bring qualities that make life work. And so if you're highly organized, learn how you can use that to help others. Learn the positives. If you're spontaneous, learn the positives of that. But if that's part of your complex trauma, a control freak versus being very unorganized, deal with those issues as well. Okay, let me give you another couple questions. Are you very sentimental? Yes or no? 16. Do you consider yourself to be A, warm, empathetic, or B, very logical? 17. Do you share your emotions freely, or do you keep your feelings to yourself? You're more stoic, more reserved. So those are pointing to, is a person kind of more thinking-based or more emotionally based? Are they driven more by their emotions or by their logic? Again, not good, bad, but different. And so that's just how we all are wired differently. Some more questions. Do you contemplate the meaning of life or what happens after death? A, often. B, rarely. 19. Do you enjoy thinking about philosophy, theories about life, theories about happiness? Or B, the here and now, what we know, what needs to get done? Those point to are bent on what we enjoy, what we like to think about. Number 20. Do you consider yourself to be A, a practical, realistic person, or B, a creative, imaginative person? 21. In doing something that many other people can do, Does it appeal to you more to A, do it in the accepted way, or B, analyze how it is done, and if you see how it could be improved, invent a way of your own? 22, are you the type of person who spends a lot of time analyzing why things are the way they are, or B, just enjoys life? C, do you consider yourself to be conventional? You like to do things the way they've always been done. Or B, creative. You like to look for new ways to do things. 24, do you see yourself as a person who colors inside the lines, or B, who colors outside the lines? So again, are you analytical? Are you conventional? Or are you creative? How do you process information? How do you approach life? All of that is part of personality. Let me just give you a couple other categories when it comes to thinking about your personality. So one of the things I would look for in people is, how observant are they? Are they very observant, or are they just la 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 and don't notice very much? One's not better than the other, they're just different. Are they a very serious-minded person or very carefree type person? Are they an intense, driven type A personality person, or are they very laid back, very casual? Are they a natural leader, or do they naturally follow? Are they very detail oriented, or are they very big picture oriented? Are they very task oriented, or are they connecting with people oriented? What is their natural bent? What appeals to them more? Do they learn best by listening, by reading, or by doing? All of those things, we're all a bit different. All of those things make us who we are. Those are our personalities. So let me just go to then, how can I just keep growing in this area? So you can take a personality test. And like I said, there's many that are free that you can get online. And I would encourage you to do it. I think you'll find it quite fascinating to do one that is quite thorough. But don't just stop there. If you want to get to know who you are, be like that child who is curious. So try new things you've never tried before. Try new hobbies. Try new activities. Now, I need to tell you this, that trying new things will trigger fear. Because the fear is, what happens if I can't do it and I look stupid? What happens if I fail? And that could trigger your shame. That could trigger all kinds of other fears. So in order for you to find out who you are, my point is, you got to walk through fear. Because it's going to trigger fears left and right as you begin to explore and be curious about finding out who you are, what you like, what you're good at. Third thing I would suggest is to ask somebody who knows you well, who's fairly healthy, to mirror back to you what you're like, what your personality's like, what your natural gifts and talents are, what you're good at, what you seem to have a passion for, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if it's a person who loves you and values you and respects you, they can do that in a way that just helps you get a more accurate picture and you don't feel judged or shamed by what they say. And then I would encourage you to read books about personalities, about styles of learning, all of those things that we've talked about. But also read biographies of people who've impacted the world, our culture. Because sometimes as you read those biographies, you get in touch with your own passion. You get in touch with what you want your purpose in life to be. Now I have to end by saying this. How long does it take a child in a healthy home to figure out who they are? It takes years. They start curiosity and exploring at a very young age, and they have to do that for years, and then they get into their teens and they can try more things and get a better sense of what their skills are. And hopefully by the time they're into their 20s, they're getting a pretty good idea as to who they are. So why do I tell you that? Because so many people from complex trauma who are now in their 30s and 40s, they come and say, tell me who I am, and they want some way to figure it out in a week. It's going to take you a while to figure out who you are. That's okay. Be patient with the process. You'll gradually figure it out. The other thing I want to just say in conclusion is this. Remember, a child can only figure out who they are when they're in a safe environment. It's only there they can be authentic. It's only there they can be curious. It's only there they can explore their internal world. So you need, if you're going to figure out who you are today, you need safe people. You need safe environment so that you can begin that exploration process. So my desire, my hope as I work with people is I want to get them, but then I want them to be able to figure out who they are, to get themselves. And it is so exciting to see people beginning to figure out who they are. It gives them a sense of purpose. It gives them a sense of joy that is just beautiful to watch. So I hope that helps you. That's the end of part 1. We're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to come back and do part 2, which is the Christian part. And again, we're just very sensitive that for some people, they don't have any interest in that, and we're not offended by that. And so we just give you permission to sign off, and we'll see you next week. To everybody else, I'll be back in just a minute. Well, welcome back. We've been looking at the life of a young man named Joseph, and at this point in his life, he's 17 years old. And last week, we saw him undergo just tremendous tragedy, tremendous trauma. His 10 older brothers wanted to kill him because they hated him so much, because he was a favored child. But they decided that they were going to sell him to merchants who were traveling to Egypt to be sold as a slave. So Joseph was yanked from his family, from his father. He was taken to a foreign country, to a foreign culture, foreign language, all alone as a 17-year-old, where he was paraded in a slave market, probably naked, before thousands of people coming to check him out, wanting to see whether or not they would buy him. And we just saw that that was so hard. And also what made it so hard is Joseph had a dream that God was going to make him great. And now he's going to be a slave. And there's confusion around God and God's promises to him. Just extremely difficult. Now what we don't know is how long did Joseph stay in the slave market before somebody actually bought him? How was he treated when he was in that slave market? What kind of abuse did he undergo as people poked him and checked him out? So we're not told anything about that. The best guess from what we see in the rest of the story is this was a very brutal time for Joseph. He was not just dealing with being a slave, he was dealing with being separated from his dad and from home and all of those things. And he struggled greatly, but somehow he was able to work through some of that to get to a better place in his mind. And then one day, a man shows up and buys him. His name is Potiphar, and we're told some interesting things about Potiphar. It says, when Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. In other words, Potiphar was captain of the king's bodyguard. Now that you can see right away is pretty important position. More than that, the Pharaoh, the most powerful man in Egypt, the most powerful man in the world at that time, he would very, very carefully pick his bodyguards because he knew a lot of people probably wanted to kill him. And so his bodyguards had to be men that he could trust implicitly with his life. And so the captain of the bodyguards would have to be his most trusted friend. And so what you begin to realize is Potiphar was probably the closest person to Pharaoh, the most trusted by Pharaoh. That made Potiphar a very powerful, a very privileged man who lived a life of great respect, a life of great wealth and luxury because of his connection to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And so Joseph is bought by this very, very powerful man. But also Potiphar, being a bodyguard, was probably at one time a soldier. He is a hardened man. He knew all about combat. He knew all about fighting, killing people in order to protect Pharaoh. And so this is the home that Joseph comes into. And we're not really told what he had Joseph do when he first became a slave. We are told that he was given a whole bunch of jobs and kind of made progress through that, but we aren't told exactly what he had Joseph do. And so it would be my guess that he had Joseph start with the most menial tasks, the Joe jobs, the jobs nobody else wanted to do, the ugly jobs, the disgusting jobs. And that's where Joseph started as a slave. And so then here's what we're told. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. So Potiphar watches this slave, and it's like whatever this kid does, it's successful. Good stuff comes out of it. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He starts promoting him, giving him jobs. Wow, he's successful there. He does great there. This succeeds. I'm going to make him my personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household. Now he was in charge of all the other slaves. Now he's in charge of the finances, the bringing in the food, the kitchens, the cleaning, all of the aspects of his house. Joseph was put in charge of that. He was put in charge of everything Potiphar owned. And from the day Joseph was put in charge in his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All of his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. Now just stop and think about that. Joseph, just his magic fingers, whatever he touches turns to gold, is successful. Potiphar sees that, promotes him, puts him in charge of everything. And all of a sudden, Potiphar is getting richer than he ever was. Potiphar is getting greater respect than he ever had. Potiphar is saying, I've got my meal ticket here in this kid. He's only 17, 18, 19, whatever, how many years transpired, but he's going, this kid is amazing. And so Joseph begins to get lots of respect. The other slaves look up to him. Potiphar looks up to him. He is talked about everywhere. Can you imagine what Joseph is going through in his head? Maybe God's going to give me my dream again. Maybe that little thing of being sent to Egypt as a slave was just a hiccup in the road, and God's going to make me great again. And his hopes are starting to get up. Maybe my dreams will still come true. Maybe all of this is going to happen. It's looking like it is. It's so positive. I am getting so much power and influence and respect. And Joseph is starting to gain hope again. But it says this: Joseph was very handsome. He wasn't just handsome. He was very handsome and well-built young man. So he's in his late teens. Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. And one day she says, "Come and sleep with me." But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's held nothing back from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." But she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, trying to get him to sleep with her, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. He started avoiding her. And one day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. And it's quite likely that Potiphar's wife cleared out all the servants that day. She came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, "Come on, sleep with me." She's not used to having a slave or anybody say no to her. Joseph tore himself away. But to do that, he had to pull himself out of his cloak, and he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. And when she saw that she was holding his cloak and he had fled, she called out to her servants, "Help, help, help." Soon all the men came running. "Look," she said, "my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed, and when he heard my scream, he ran outside and got away, but he left his cloak behind with me." She just told a huge fabrication. She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home. And you can imagine she pours on the tears, does this great acting job. She told him her story. "That Hebrew slave you brought into our house tried to come in and fool around with me. But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his cloak behind." Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. Wow. Joseph's hope just got dashed again. His dreams just crushed again. This is an unfair situation. He didn't do any of the things he was accused of. But do you realize that for Potiphar, so powerful in Egypt, to send Joseph to prison, basically it was the dungeon where the king's prisoners were kept. Basically, there was no hope he was ever going to get out. This would be where he would die, because Potiphar was not going to give him a fair trial. Nobody was going to hear his pleas, because to hear his pleas would go against Potiphar. Now, it is possible that Potiphar had a little bit of suspicion, because you realize he could have killed Joseph and nobody would have batted an eye. But the fact that he just threw him into prison causes me to wonder if maybe Potiphar had a wee bit of doubt about what his wife told him. He maybe knew of her flirtatious, promiscuous ways. But for Joseph, what would it have been like to sit in that dungeon as the reality sinks in? I may never get out of here. This is probably where I'm going to die. I will never get a fair trial. The anger he would feel, the hurt of the injustice, the anger at Potiphar's wife for her lies. Here he was being so virtuous, but then there might have been some anger at God. I'm following you. I'm doing what is good. And this is how I get rewarded? I can imagine this was, again, just a hard, crushing, dark place for Joseph. And that's where I'm going to leave him today. But what I want you to see just as we end is, again, Joseph had to work through some painful stuff. But he got himself back to a place that was healthy. And we'll start to see that over the next couple of weeks. Let's pray. Father, so many here can relate to Joseph, to have a life where things aren't fair, where you're falsely accused, a life where people purposely abuse you, neglect you, a life of hurt, confusion, deep pain, crushed dreams. And I just pray that through this story of Joseph, you would encourage them and just help them as they process through all this painful stuff. Amen. Well, that's the end of another Friday night. Thank you so much for being here, being part of